My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old. The day my parents gave away my entire college fund to pay for my sister's wedding, they didn't just steal money. They stole the future they had promised me since I was a little girl. And when I begged them not to do it, they looked me in the eyes and told me something I'll never forget. Your sister needs this more than you do. 10 years later, they stood in the parking lot of my company's headquarters, staring at a building worth more than everything they owned combined, and for the first time in their lives, they needed something from me. Before I get into this story, if you've ever been the overlooked child, the family member who's always expected to sacrifice while someone else gets everything, hit that like button and subscribe. Because this story isn't just about revenge. It's about what happens when the people who should believe in you the most decide you're worth less than someone else. And trust me, the ending was something none of them saw coming. I grew up knowing exactly where I stood in my family. Not because anyone said it outright, because nobody had to. Families have ways of communicating things without words: the seating arrangements, the birthday gifts, the excuses, the double standards, the way disappointment feels heavier when it lands on one child than the other. My older sister Rachel was the sun. The rest of us were expected to orbit around her. Rachel was 3 years older than me. Blonde, outgoing, effortlessly charming. The kind of person who could walk into a room and have everyone laughing within 5 minutes. People adored her. Teachers adored her. Neighbors adored her. My parents practically worshipped her. Meanwhile, I was quieter, more serious. The kid who read books instead of going to parties. The kid who got straight A's and somehow made it look boring. Rachel got a B on a test and my parents celebrated because she tried her best. I got a 98 and got asked what happened to the other 2 points. You know those little moments that don't seem important individually? Those moments pile up. They become a mountain. When Rachel forgot chores, my mother laughed and called her absent-minded. When I forgot chores, I got a lecture about responsibility. When Rachel wanted expensive clothes, they somehow found money. When I needed supplies for school projects, suddenly we had to watch the budget. The strange thing is that I spent years convincing myself I was imagining it. Because children want to believe their parents are fair. Children want to believe they're loved equally. It's easier to doubt yourself than face the possibility that your parents genuinely favor someone else. But there was one thing that kept me going. One promise: college. Ever since I was 10 years old, my parents talked about my college fund, my father especially. He'd sit at the dinner table and tell me how proud he was. Emily's going places. Emily's going to have opportunities we never had. We're making sure of it. Every birthday, every Christmas, every report card, the same message. There was money set aside, money specifically for my education, money that would help me build my future. And because I believed them, I worked harder. I studied while other kids hung out. I took advanced classes. I skipped parties. I spent weekends preparing for scholarships and entrance exams. I built my entire life around a future I thought was secure. By the time I graduated high school, I had nearly perfect grades, multiple college acceptance letters, scholarship offers, and one dream school. A business program I'd worked toward for years. The tuition wasn't cheap. But with scholarships and my college fund, it was possible. Everything I'd sacrificed seemed worth it. I still remember the acceptance letter, the thick envelope, the university seal, my hands shaking as I opened it. I screamed, actually screamed. My mother came running into the room. My father followed. And for one brief moment, everyone was happy, even Rachel. At least, that's what I thought. 3 weeks later, everything changed. Rachel got engaged. Now, under normal circumstances, that wouldn't have been a problem. But Rachel wasn't marrying someone responsible. His name was Tyler. And Tyler was the human equivalent of a bad financial decision. He bounced between jobs, had debt, made grand promises he never kept. Every conversation with him sounded like a motivational seminar hosted by a guy living in his friend's basement. I didn't dislike him initially. I just didn't trust him. My parents adored him. Of course they did. Rachel loved him. That was enough. The engagement quickly became the center of the universe. Wedding magazines appeared everywhere. Phone calls lasted hours. Family gatherings became wedding planning sessions. And then the budget discussion started. At first, I ignored them. Not my problem. I was preparing for college. I was planning dorm arrangements, course schedules, financial aid paperwork, my future. Then one night my parents asked me to sit down. Their voices sounded strange, careful, measured, the kind of tone people use before delivering bad news. I remember the dining room perfectly. The yellow light fixture, the smell of coffee, the silence. Rachel was there too, looking nervous. My stomach dropped instantly. My father folded his hands. "Emily," he said, "we need to talk." Whenever a parent starts a sentence like that, nothing good follows. I waited. My mother looked away. My father cleared his throat. Then he said the words that shattered everything. "There have been some changes regarding your college fund." My heartbeat stopped. What changes? Nobody answered immediately, and that's when I knew. That's when I really knew. The money was gone. I could see it in their faces. I could see it before they said it. The fund I'd spent years believing in, years depending on, years organizing my future around. Gone. "We had to make a difficult decision," my father said. My ears started ringing. "What decision?" Rachel suddenly started crying. That made me furious, because somehow I already knew this involved her. Of course it involved her. Everything always did. My mother finally spoke. "The wedding costs became higher than expected." I stared, not understanding, not wanting to understand. "What does that have to do with my college fund?" Silence. Then my father said it. "We used the money." The room felt like it tilted. I genuinely thought I might faint. "What?" "We borrowed from it." Borrowed. Such a dishonest word. Because everyone in that room knew it wasn't borrowed. The money wasn't coming back. "How much?" Nobody answered. My voice rose. "How much?" My father finally met my eyes. All of it. I felt physically sick. Not emotionally, physically. Like I'd been punched in the stomach. Years. Years of promises. Years of sacrifice. Gone. For flowers. For a venue. For centerpieces. For one day. One single day. I looked at Rachel, and instead of guilt, she looked embarrassed. Like this situation was awkward for her. Not devastating for me. Embarrassing. "I didn't ask them to do this," she said softly. That was the first lie. And it wouldn't be the last. I stood up so quickly my chair nearly fell backward. "No." My father frowned. "No what?" "No." I could hear my own heartbeat. "No, you're not doing this." His expression hardened. "Emily." "No." For the first time in my life, I interrupted him. "You promised me." Things change. Things change. I can still hear those words. As if my future was some minor inconvenience. As if years of promises could be erased with 3 syllables. I looked around the table, waiting. Waiting for someone to say this was a mistake. Waiting for someone to fix it. Nobody did. Then my mother delivered the sentence that changed my relationship with my family forever. "Your sister needs this more than you do." The room went silent. Even Rachel looked uncomfortable. But nobody disagreed. Nobody corrected her. Nobody said she was wrong. Because that was the truth. Not the statement. The belief behind it. Rachel mattered more. Her happiness mattered more. Her wedding mattered more. Her dreams mattered more. And my future? Apparently it was negotiable. I walked out. I don't remember driving. I don't remember where I went. I just remember sitting in a parking lot for hours, staring at nothing, trying to process what had happened. At some point, I started crying. Then I stopped. Then I started again. Then eventually, there were no tears left. Just anger. Cold. Heavy. Permanent anger. Because the money wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing I'd never mattered as much as she'd mattered. The money simply proved it. That night I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling until sunrise, replaying every conversation, every promise, every sacrifice, every sign I'd ignored. And as the sun came up, I realized something terrifying. Nobody was going to save me. Nobody was going to fix this. Nobody was going to give the money back. If I wanted a future, I'd have to build it completely alone. But I had no idea then just how far that decision would take me, or how badly my family would eventually regret theirs. And the first regret came much sooner than any of us expected. The first regret came 3 months later. Not from my parents, not from Rachel, from me. Because despite everything, despite the betrayal, despite the anger that felt like acid in my chest every time I thought about that dinner table, there was still a part of me that wanted them to come to their senses. A stupid part. A hopeful part. The part of every child that never completely stops wanting their parents' approval. College orientation was approaching. Tuition deadlines were approaching. Reality was approaching. And every day I waited for a phone call. Maybe Dad had found a solution. Maybe Mom realized what they'd done. Maybe Rachel offered to postpone the wedding. Maybe somebody in that family would choose me for once. Nobody did. The wedding plans only got bigger, more extravagant, more expensive, more ridiculous. Every time I visited home, I saw evidence of where my future had gone. Designer invitations, imported flowers, custom decorations, a venue overlooking a lake, a live band, an open bar, thousands, then tens of thousands, then more. Each expense felt like another piece of my future being burned in front of me. The worst part? Nobody seemed ashamed. They acted like I was the one creating tension, like I should be understanding. Like sacrificing my education for Rachel's wedding was some noble family contribution. One afternoon, about a month before the wedding, my mother cornered me in the kitchen. "You've been distant." I nearly laughed. Distant. That was her concern. Not the stolen college fund, not the broken promises, not the fact that I'd had to reject my dream school. I was distant. She folded her arms. "Your sister notices." "Good." The word slipped out before I could stop it. Her eyes widened. "Emily." "What?" "That's your sister." I turned toward her. "And I'm your daughter." The silence afterward felt sharp, uncomfortable. For a moment, I thought maybe she'd finally understand. Maybe she'd see it. The hurt. The betrayal. Instead, she sighed. Actually sighed. Like I was exhausting her. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Those words did something to me. Not explosive, not dramatic. Something quieter. A door closed. Because suddenly I understood. They genuinely didn't think they'd done anything wrong. That's what made it so much worse. If they'd admitted it was selfish, if they'd apologized, if they'd shown even a little guilt, maybe things could have been repaired. But they didn't. They believed they were right. And that realization changed everything. I stopped expecting fairness. I stopped expecting accountability. Most importantly, I stopped expecting help. The wedding happened in late summer. And yes, I went. Not because I wanted to, because I needed closure. I needed to see exactly what my future had been traded for. The venue was beautiful, painfully beautiful. Every detail was perfect. White roses everywhere, crystal chandeliers, professional photographers, luxury catering. People spent the entire evening talking about how incredible the wedding was, how magical, how unforgettable. I remember standing near the back of the reception hall watching Rachel dance with Dad. Everyone smiling, everyone celebrating. And all I could think was, there goes my degree. There goes my dorm room. There goes my future. Swirling around a dance floor. My father eventually found me standing alone. Why aren't you enjoying yourself? The question was so absurd I almost laughed. Instead, I looked around the room. How much did all this cost? His face hardened instantly. Not today. No, tell me. Emily, tell me. He looked away. And that's when I knew the number was even worse than I'd imagined. That wedding wasn't just expensive. It was obscene. The kind of expense people justify because they're spending someone else's future. I left before the reception ended. Nobody stopped me. Nobody followed me. Nobody called. That told me everything. A week later, I moved into a tiny apartment near a community college. Not a university. Not my dream school. Community college. Because it was what I could afford. The apartment was awful. 700 square feet. Thin walls. Old carpet. A refrigerator that sounded like it was fighting for its life. The bathroom smelled vaguely like mildew no matter how much I cleaned it. But it was mine. And unlike my parents' promises, it actually existed. To pay tuition and rent, I worked 3 jobs. Morning shifts at a coffee shop, afternoon classes, evening data entry work, weekends tutoring high school students. There were days I survived on instant noodles and caffeine. Days I fell asleep fully dressed because I was too exhausted to change clothes. Days my feet hurt so badly I cried in the shower. Meanwhile, Rachel's social media looked like a luxury travel advertisement. Honeymoon photos, beach resorts, wine tastings, weekend getaways, smiling selfies. Every picture felt like a slap. Not because she was happy, because part of that happiness belonged to me, or at least the opportunity did. I stopped looking eventually, for my own sanity. The next few years blurred together. Work, school, bills, work, school, bills, repeat. I watched classmates enjoy college experiences I'd never have. Spring break trips, campus events, internships they could afford to take because their parents helped them. I didn't have that luxury. Every decision came down to survival. Every dollar had a purpose. And yet, something strange happened. I became stronger. Not happier. Not yet. Stronger. Because hardship has a way of stripping away illusions. I learned exactly how much pressure I could handle, exactly how resourceful I could be, exactly how determined I became when failure wasn't an option. At 21, I transferred into a university using scholarships I'd fought like hell to earn. At 22, I started freelancing online, marketing work, content strategy, small business consulting, anything clients would pay for. I wasn't thinking about entrepreneurship. I wasn't dreaming about becoming wealthy. I just needed money, needed options, needed breathing room. But slowly, clients started returning, then referring other clients, then paying more, then asking for bigger projects. One client became 5, 5 became 12, 12 became 20. For the first time in years, something was working. Really working. I still remember my first 4-figure month. I stared at my banking app for almost an hour, refreshing the screen repeatedly, convinced it was a mistake. Then my first 5-figure month happened. And suddenly the possibility appeared. A dangerous possibility. Maybe I didn't need permission. Maybe I didn't need family support. Maybe I didn't need anyone. The thought terrified me, because if it was true, then everything I'd been taught growing up was wrong. Around that same time, Rachel called me unexpectedly. the first real conversation we'd had in months. I answered reluctantly. Hello? Her voice sounded strained, tired, different. Hey. We exchanged awkward pleasantries. Then came the real reason she'd called. Tyler had lost another job. Debt was piling up. Money was tight. The honeymoon phase was over, literally and figuratively. I listened quietly. Part of me felt sympathy. Another part remembered the wedding, remembered my college fund, remembered that dining room. Eventually, she sighed. I just don't know what we're going to do. I waited. Then came the question, the one she'd clearly been building toward. Could you help us? The audacity nearly took my breath away. Not because she asked without acknowledging anything. No apology, no accountability, no mention of the money. Just an assumption that I'd step in, like always, like everyone always had. I closed my eyes, my hands trembling slightly. Then I said something that shocked even me. No. Silence. Long silence. Emily. No. The same word I'd used years earlier, the same word nobody listened to. This time, somebody had to. We're family. I laughed. Actually laughed. A bitter sound I barely recognized. That's interesting. What? Family mattered when you needed my college fund. Another silence. Heavy this time. Guilty. She finally whispered, You're still angry. Still angry, as if betrayal came with an expiration date, as if years of struggle erased what happened. I'm hanging up now. And I did. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. Afterward, I sat in my apartment staring at the wall, feeling something unexpected. Not guilt. Relief. The relief was enormous. Like setting down a weight I'd carried for years. Because saying no wasn't about money, it was about boundaries. About refusing to sacrifice myself for people who never would have done the same. That moment became a turning point. Not because it fixed anything, because it changed me. I stopped seeing myself as the victim. I started seeing myself as someone with choices. And once that shift happened, everything accelerated. My freelance business expanded. Clients grew larger. Contracts grew bigger. Revenue climbed. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was building. Building something entirely my own. Something nobody could take. Nobody could redirect. Nobody could hand to Rachel. And yet, as successful as things were becoming, I still carried anger. Not the explosive kind, the quiet kind, the dangerous kind, the kind that waits patiently, the kind that remembers, the kind that doesn't want apologies anymore. It wants consequences. And 4 years after my parents stole my future, an opportunity appeared. An opportunity so perfect it almost felt like fate. Because suddenly, the same people who had once told me my sister needed everything more than I did were about to discover exactly what happens when the forgotten child stops asking for fairness and starts building leverage instead. And when I realized what was possible, I began planning, very carefully, very patiently. Because revenge isn't satisfying when it's impulsive. It's satisfying when the people who underestimated you help create it themselves. And that's exactly what they were about to do. If you'd asked me at 20 years old whether I wanted revenge, I would have said yes immediately. The answer would have come from pure emotion, pure anger, pure hurt. I wanted my parents to feel what I felt. I wanted Rachel to understand what she'd taken from me. I wanted anybody to finally acknowledge that what happened wasn't fair. But revenge imagined in pain looks very different from revenge planned with patience. By the time I was 25, I wasn't the same person anymore. The girl who cried in parking lots was gone. The girl who stared at tuition bills wondering if she'd ever catch up was gone too. In her place was someone harder, sharper, Someone who understood something my family never had. Money wasn't the real power. Dependence was. And for the first time in my life, I didn't depend on them. Meanwhile, they were slowly becoming dependent on circumstances they couldn't control. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It happened through thousands of tiny moments: late-night client calls, contracts, mistakes, learning, growing, failing, recovering, repeating. My freelance operation eventually became a small agency, then a larger agency, then something that looked less like a side business and more like a real company. I hired my first employee, then 3, then 7. Each new hire felt surreal, because every paycheck I issued reminded me of where I'd started. That tiny apartment, the instant noodles, the exhaustion, the constant fear. Now people depended on me, trusted me, believed in me, more than my own family ever had. And ironically, that trust made me work even harder. I became obsessed with growth, not in an unhealthy billionaire worship sort of way, in a survivalist way, because every new client represented freedom. Every successful quarter represented security. Every dollar earned represented something nobody could take away. By 26, the company crossed 7 figures in annual revenue. The day the accountant showed me the numbers, I just sat there, staring, not speaking, not reacting. The accountant actually laughed. Most people celebrate. I nodded slowly. I know. Then why do you look upset? Because I wasn't upset. I was overwhelmed. Because suddenly, after years of scrambling, struggling, surviving, I realized I had done it. Not completely, not perfectly, but I'd built something real, something valuable, something my parents once believed I couldn't achieve without them. The funny thing? They barely knew any of it. We still spoke occasionally. Birthdays, major holidays, family gatherings, the bare minimum. But they never asked many questions, and I stopped volunteering information years earlier. If they wanted details, they could have asked. They never did. To them, I was still Emily, quiet Emily, responsible Emily, predictable Emily, the daughter who would always figure things out. Rachel, meanwhile, remained the center of attention, though not for the reasons she probably wanted. Her marriage was deteriorating. Tyler bounced between jobs. Financial problems multiplied. Arguments became common. Family conversations increasingly revolved around helping them pay bills, helping them cover emergencies, helping them stay afloat. Every time I heard about it, I experienced a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt sorry for her. I genuinely did. Nobody dreams of ending up trapped in a failing marriage. Nobody deserves that. But another part of me remembered something. Nobody had worried about my future either. Nobody had stepped in when my life got harder. Nobody had asked what sacrificing my education would cost me. So whenever my parents complained about Rachel's struggles, I listened politely, then moved on. I wasn't cruel. I just wasn't volunteering to be sacrificed anymore. The opportunity that changed everything appeared at a family barbecue. One of those uncomfortable gatherings where everyone pretends things are normal. The weather was hot. Children ran through sprinklers. Adults sat around folding tables making small talk. I was standing near the grill when I overheard my father talking to one of my uncles. "We're thinking about refinancing." That got my attention immediately. My uncle frowned. "Again?" Dad sighed. "Just until things stabilize." My stomach tightened, because I knew exactly what that meant. Debt. Significant debt. I listened carefully. Apparently, over the years, my parents had repeatedly helped Rachel and Tyler. Loans, credit cards, emergency expenses, legal fees, medical bills, mortgage assistance. The amounts varied. The pattern didn't. Whenever Rachel had a problem, my parents threw money at it. Again, and again, and again. The result was predictable. Their savings were disappearing, retirement funds shrinking, debt increasing. The golden child wasn't just expensive anymore, she was unsustainable. That night, driving home, I couldn't stop thinking, not because I wanted them to suffer, because something finally clicked. For years, I'd assumed justice would come from confrontation. Some dramatic argument, some emotional confession, some moment where everyone acknowledged the truth. But that wasn't going to happen. People rarely admit they've spent a decade making bad decisions, especially when those decisions involve their favorite child. No, if accountability ever arrived, it would come another way. Reality. Reality is ruthless. Reality doesn't care about favoritism. Reality doesn't negotiate. And reality was catching up with them. Over the next year, I paid closer attention. Not obsessively, just enough. The pattern became obvious. Rachel and Tyler's problems grew. My parents kept rescuing them. Each rescue created another emergency later. It was like watching someone repeatedly pour water into a sinking boat instead of fixing the hole. Then came the divorce. Rachel called me crying one evening, completely shattered. Tyler had left. Not only left with debt, legal complications, financial disasters. The marriage my future had helped fund collapsed spectacularly. I listened quietly. For nearly an hour. She cried, ranted, blamed him, blamed circumstances, blamed bad luck. She blamed almost everyone, except herself. When the call ended, I sat in silence, not celebrating, not feeling victorious, just reflective. Because suddenly the wedding looked different. All those flowers, all those decorations, all those sacrifices. Gone. The marriage hadn't even lasted long enough to justify the photo albums. Meanwhile, I was still living with the consequences. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. A few months later, my mother called. And this conversation changed everything. She sounded nervous. More nervous than I'd ever heard her. After several minutes of awkward small talk, she finally got to the point. Your father and I are considering some options. My instincts immediately activated. What options? A pause. Then, we might need some financial help. The words hung in the air. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. Financial help. From me. The daughter whose future they'd liquidated. The daughter who apparently needed less than Rachel. The daughter who'd been expected to simply adapt. I felt something cold settle inside me. Not anger. Clarity. Pure clarity. What kind of help? Another pause. Longer this time. Then she told me. The amount wasn't small. It wasn't catastrophic either. But it was substantial. Enough to reveal serious problems. Enough to confirm everything I'd suspected. Enough to prove that years of prioritizing Rachel had consequences. I asked a few questions. Carefully, patiently. The more she explained, the more obvious the situation became. My parents weren't facing a temporary setback. They were facing the bill for a decade of favoritism. And they expected me to help pay it. After all, I was responsible, reliable, successful. The irony was breathtaking. That night, I barely slept. Not because I didn't know what to do, because I knew exactly what I wanted to do. The question was how. Because this wasn't about refusing money. That would have been easy. Too easy. No. The opportunity was bigger than that. Much bigger. For years, my family had viewed me through an outdated lens. They still thought of me as the overlooked daughter, the backup plan, the dependable child, the one who quietly absorbed disappointment. They had absolutely no idea who I'd become, no idea what I'd built, no idea how successful the company had become. And suddenly, I realized something. The greatest revenge wasn't taking something from them, it was showing them exactly what they'd thrown away. Not through words, through reality, through undeniable evidence. I wanted them to see what happened when the child they underestimated stopped waiting for permission. I wanted them to confront the cost of their choices, not emotionally, financially, socially, psychologically, completely. So I began planning, slowly, methodically, the way I'd built everything else. Step one was simple. I agreed to meet, in person. No promises, no commitments, just a conversation. My parents sounded relieved immediately, almost excited, as if they'd already solved the problem. That told me everything. They still assumed access. Access to my time, my resources, my success. The meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks later. During those 2 weeks, I prepared carefully. Not documents, not presentations, perspective. Because this wasn't going to be an argument. Arguments create defensiveness. I wanted something else. I wanted recognition, the kind that arrives too late, the kind that hurts. The day finally arrived, and when my parents walked into my office building, everything changed. Because for the first time in their lives, they were forced to see me exactly as I was. Not the forgotten daughter, not the backup child, not Rachel's younger sister, me. And judging by the look on their faces when they stepped into the lobby, they were completely unprepared for what they found. What happened during that meeting would become the moment our family dynamics changed forever. And by the time it ended, the people who once told me I mattered less than a wedding would finally understand the true cost of that decision. The morning of the meeting, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. Not because I was nervous, because I wanted a few minutes alone, a few minutes to stand in the lobby and remember. Remember the apartment with the broken refrigerator. Remember the sleepless nights. Remember the humiliation of withdrawing from my dream school. Remember sitting in that parking lot after my parents told me my future mattered less than Rachel's wedding. The lobby was quiet. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Employees drifted in carrying coffee. Phones rang, keyboards clicked. The business was alive, growing, real. Every square foot of that building represented years of sacrifice, years nobody had helped with, years nobody had financed, years nobody had believed in. At exactly 10 o'clock, my assistant called. "They're here." I took a breath, then smiled. "Send them up." A few minutes later, the elevator doors opened, and for the first time in years, I saw my parents genuinely speechless. They'd known I owned a company. In the same vague way people know someone works in technology, or real estate, or finance. They understood the words. They didn't understand the scale. Not until now. Not until they walked through an office filled with employees. Not until they saw conference rooms with my company's name on the walls. Not until they passed departments managed by people whose salaries exceeded what I'd earned in an entire year back in college. My father stared around the office. My mother looked overwhelmed. And suddenly, I realized something. This was the first time either of them had ever looked impressed by me. That realization hurt more than I expected. Even after all these years, even after all my success, a part of me still wished they'd looked at me that way when I was 18, when I needed it, when I would have traded anything for their support. I greeted them politely, professional, calm, then led them into a conference room. Nobody spoke for a moment. The silence felt strange, because the power dynamic had shifted completely. For my entire childhood, they'd controlled every major decision. Now they sat across from me on the opposite side of a polished conference table, waiting. My mother finally broke the silence. "This is incredible." I nodded. "Thank you." My father looked around again. "How many employees do you have now?" 42. His eyebrows shot upward. For a second, I saw genuine pride. Then the moment disappeared. Business conversation eventually turned toward the reason they'd come. Money. Of course. The request was almost exactly what I'd expected. They needed assistance restructuring debt, managing obligations, protecting retirement plans. The details weren't important. The pattern was. Rachel had needed help. Again. My parents had stepped in. Again. Now they were paying the price. Again. Only this time, they couldn't solve it themselves. My father cleared his throat. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. I nodded slowly. I know. We just need some breathing room. Another nod. I understand. My mother looked relieved. Far too relieved. As though the difficult part was already over. As though my answer was guaranteed. That's when I asked a question. A simple one. The room immediately changed. Do you remember my college fund? Silence. Instant silence. My father's shoulders stiffened. My mother's expression fell. Nobody spoke. So I continued. When was the last time either of you thought about it? My father sighed heavily. Emily. No, I'm genuinely curious. The room felt smaller, tighter. The air itself seemed heavier. My mother looked down at her hands. My father rubbed his forehead. Neither answered. And that answer was enough, because I already knew the truth. They hadn't thought about it. Not really. Not in years. The consequences had belonged to me, not them. I leaned back, calmly. No matter how hard things got, I thought about it every day. Neither spoke. I thought about it when I couldn't afford textbooks. Silence. I thought about it when I worked 3 jobs. Silence. I thought about it when I turned down opportunities because I couldn't afford them. Silence. I thought about it every time someone asked where I went to school. The room had become painfully quiet. My mother started crying. Genuine tears. But something inside me had changed over the years. 10 years earlier, her tears would have stopped me. 10 years earlier, I would have rushed to make everyone comfortable. Not anymore, because discomfort was long overdue. My father finally spoke. We made mistakes. The words landed strangely, because I'd imagined hearing them for years, dreamed about them, expected them to feel satisfying. Instead, they just felt late. Very late. You did. He nodded. Slowly, painfully. We thought we were helping. I know. My mother wiped her eyes. We never wanted to hurt you. I almost laughed, not because I doubted her, because intent didn't matter anymore. Consequences mattered. The road to every disaster is paved with people explaining what they meant to do. I sat quietly for a moment, then opened a folder I'd brought into the meeting. Not financial records, not contracts, photos, pictures, old ones. I slid the first photo across the table. Me at 18, holding my acceptance letter. Smiling so hard my cheeks looked painful. My mother immediately recognized it. Her hand flew to her mouth. Then I placed a second photo beside it. My first apartment, tiny, cramped, barely furnished. Then another. Me working at a coffee shop. Then another. My graduation photo. Then another. The first office. The first employees. The first company event. The first building. The progression. The journey. The reality. Every stage they'd missed. Every milestone they'd never asked about. Every victory I'd earned without them. My father stared at the photos for a very long time, then quietly asked, "Why are you showing us this?" The answer came instantly, because I'd been carrying it for years. Because this is what your decision cost. My mother cried harder. My father's eyes never left the table. You think this is about money? I shook my head. It never was. Nobody spoke. It was about belief. I pointed toward the first photograph. You promised me something. Then the final photograph, a recent aerial image of the company headquarters. And when you broke that promise, I learned I'd have to believe in myself instead. Silence. Deep silence. The kind that only arrives when nobody has an excuse left. Finally, my father whispered something I never expected. "We failed you." 3 words. Simple words. Late words. But real. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then I did something neither of them expected. I slid a second folder across the table. My father looked confused. My mother stopped crying long enough to glance at it. "What's this?" I folded my hands. "Open it." They did. Inside were financial documents, debt restructuring plans, investment strategies, retirement projections, professional solutions, my solutions. Their eyes widened as they flipped through the pages. My father looked up. "You already prepared this?" "Yes." My mother blinked. "You'll help us?" I smiled. And this was the moment. The moment I'd thought about for months. The moment where revenge and closure finally met. Not exactly. Confusion spread across their faces. So I explained. I wasn't giving them money. Not directly. I wasn't paying off debt. I wasn't rescuing Rachel. I wasn't becoming the family's emergency fund. Instead, I was offering something else. Work. Responsibility. Accountability. My company had recently launched a charitable entrepreneurship initiative, a program designed to help young women from disadvantaged backgrounds pursue business education. Scholarships, mentorship, training, resources, the exact support I'd never received. I told them I'd be funding it personally, at significant scale. And if they wanted my help, they could help me run it. Volunteer, organize, support, contribute time, contribute effort, contribute something meaningful, instead of simply receiving another bailout. The room went completely still. My father stared, then looked down, then laughed. A small laugh, a sad laugh. The kind people make when they finally understand a lesson they should have learned years ago. My mother cried again, but differently this time. Not from guilt, from realization, because she understood. The money they'd wanted wasn't coming, but something far more valuable was being offered. A chance to participate in repairing the kind of damage they'd once created. Eventually, my father nodded. Slowly. "We'll do it." My mother nodded too. And for the first time in years, the conversation felt honest. Not comfortable. Honest. The fallout took months, then years. But something surprising happened. The scholarship program exploded. What started as a small initiative became a major project. Dozens of young women received funding, then hundreds. Stories poured in. Students, single mothers, first-generation college attendees, people who simply needed someone to believe in them. The very thing I'd needed at 18. My parents became deeply involved, especially my mother. Sometimes I caught her talking to scholarship recipients, listening to their dreams, encouraging them, supporting them. And every time I saw it, I wondered whether she was hearing echoes of a conversation she'd never had with me. Rachel's reaction was different. At first, she was angry, then defensive, then embarrassed. Because eventually she realized something nobody could deny. The money spent on her wedding had vanished years ago. But the opportunities created by that same amount of money, invested properly, were changing lives. Including mine. Including hundreds of others. The comparison wasn't flattering. Over time, even Rachel softened. Not dramatically, not overnight, but enough. Enough to acknowledge what happened. Enough to admit she'd benefited from favoritism. Enough to stop expecting rescue. That alone was remarkable. And the company? It continued growing. The $1 million business eventually became a multi-million-dollar business, then larger still. Success compounds, just like bad decisions do. The difference is that one creates freedom, the other creates dependence. About 2 years after that meeting, I attended an event hosted by our scholarship program. Hundreds of attendees, students, families, community leaders, mentors, supporters. During the ceremony, a young woman approached me, nervous, excited, holding back tears. She'd received one of the scholarships, the first person in her family to attend college, the first person given an opportunity nobody else believed she deserved. Before leaving, she hugged me and said something I'll never forget. "Thank you for believing in me." 4 words. Simple words. Powerful words. Words I'd waited my entire childhood to hear from someone else. And in that moment, I realized something. The revenge had never really been about making my family suffer. It was about proving they were wrong. Wrong about my potential. Wrong about my worth. Wrong about what happens when someone is underestimated. The best revenge wasn't taking anything from them. It was building something so meaningful that their mistake became impossible to ignore. Today, I'm 29 years old. The company is thriving. The Scholarship Foundation continues expanding. My relationship with my parents is better than it used to be. Not perfect. Probably never perfect. Some wounds leave scars, but scars aren't the same as open wounds. My parents finally understand something they should have understood years ago. Love isn't proven through sacrifice when only one child is doing the sacrificing. And support isn't support if it's distributed based on favoritism. As for Rachel, we're closer now than we've ever been. Not because the past disappeared, because the truth finally stopped hiding. And truth, even painful truth, creates opportunities that denial never can. Sometimes people ask if I regret what happened, if I wish my parents had never touched my college fund. The honest answer? Of course I do. No one should have to lose opportunities to learn resilience. But I also know this. The girl sitting in that parking lot after her future was stolen would have never believed what was waiting for her. She thought her story had ended. In reality, it had just begun. And the people who underestimated her ended up spending the rest of their lives looking at proof of exactly how wrong they were. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. And if you've ever been the overlooked child, the underestimated employee, the person everyone assumed would quietly accept less than they deserved, remember this. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't destruction. It's success. It's building something so extraordinary that the people who doubted you are forced to live with the evidence. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. And tell me, if you were in my position, would you have helped your parents at the end, or would you have walked away completely? I'll see you in the next story.